So, just before we get into it, this story has been sponsored by my web novel, Moari Saga. It is an Afro fantasy story that has been posted on Royal Road Legends. You can go down to the description where you'll find a link to it. I very much look forward to hearing your feedback, same as I do to this video. So remember to leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and let's get on with the rest of the video. Today, Marvel is one of the biggest, most valuable intellectual property empires in history. Its characters, from Spider-Man to the Avengers, are global icons. We all know of the names Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko. These men are the architects of the Marvel Universe. But what about the man who owned the land they built it on? The man who laid the foundation, signed the checks, and most importantly, said yes to the crazy idea that comic books could star dysfunctional, realistic superheroes. His name was Martin Goodman. And while the world remembers the faces of the creators, the true founder of Marvel Comics remains remarkably a figure shrouded in obscurity. His story is not one of capes or powers, but of the raw, turbulent American ambition and a lifelong hassle that was forged in the depths of the Great Depression. Martin Goodman's life is not the uncanny, spectacular. It's not the uncanny or the spectacular. It's mostly been forgotten. But we're going to look at the man who is the origin of Marvel itself. Born Moses Goodman in 1908 in the working class streets of Brooklyn, New York, Martin's beginnings were the definition of hard. He was one of 13, perhaps 17 children born of a Jewish family of immigrants who had fled the pogroms of Lithuania. His father was a tailor, and his mother worked as a sewing machine operator. In that time, their poverty was intense. His grandson, Jason Goodman, recounts the reality of his grandfather's childhood, stating, "He grew up very poor, and he had to rip the heels off his sister's shoes as hand-me-downs so that he had shoes." School ended for young Mo, who later adopted the name Martin, in the 10th grade after his father, who at that point had become a construction worker, broke his back in a fall. Martin sold newspapers and gum by subway entrances. He had to become a man of commerce before he was even a man. His escape wasn't television or comic books, it was the magazines and books he read. He grew up dreaming of brave men and fantastic adventures. He kind of aspired to be a writer himself, but life intervened, and around 1928, before the Depression fully hit, he decided to leave the poverty behind in the most American way possible. Martin became a hobo. For at least a year, Goodman bummed around America on freight cars, cooking beans over fires and listening to people's stories. This harsh, unvarnished journey was his real education. It taught him the psychology of the average person, what stories they craved, and most importantly, how to hustle. When he returned to New York around age 20, he found his first foothold in the publishing world thanks to his connection at the distribution company Easton Distributing Corporation. There he met his mentor. Now, I'm sorry, but I cannot for the life of me say this guy's last name. His name is Louis Silbext. Louis Silbext. Look, I'm not going to spend my time here with this tongue twister. Let's just move on. So, this mentor of his, Louis, was a 29-year-old circulation manager, and within a year, Martin himself was promoted to position of circulation manager. The publishing world in the 1930s was ruled by pulp magazines. These were cheap, paper periodicals filled with adventure, science fiction, and crime. And when Eastern Distribution went bankrupt in 1932, Goodman saw his chance. He became editor of the new company, newsstand publications, and quickly established himself as a publisher. By 1934, after a complicated debt payoff involving a printer, Goodman, at that point a 26-year-old former hobo with no formal education, was a full-fledged publisher. His former partner and mentor Lewis went on to co-found the company that would become Archie Comics. So, the creator of Marvel Comics was mentored by the creator of Archie Comics. Like, when you go far back in this publishing stuff, it all connects. Like George Lucas said,
again, it's like poetry, it's sort of they rhyme. Every stanza kind of rhymes.
So, Goodman wasn't an innovator. He was a schlock master supreme. A genius at spotting a trend and producing a cheap, fast knockoff. If the Lone Ranger was popular, he made the Masked Rider. If readers wanted Tarzan, he published the blonde-haired jungle hero, Khazar. If science fiction was in, he launched Marvel Science Stories under his new imprint, Red Circle magazines. This trend-chasing business model led him to discover a bewildering web of over 100 corporate names and shell companies throughout his career. Like, if you look at Martin, the number of companies that Martin has owned, there are a lot of them. So he did this partly to mitigate the legal and financial risk, but for his critics, it was a way to stay ahead of his creditors. The anxiety of poverty never truly left him. It kind of fueled a constant, relentless drive in him to always make money. He used aggressive and often illegal business practices. He would purchase old, unsold stories from writers, publish the titles and change the titles and character names, and republish them as brand new content in his magazines without compensation. This drew the attention of the Federal Trade Commission, who sanctioned him 3 times in 1942, 1947, and 1957. Goodman, a gambler and a crapshooter, as his friend Jerry Perlis put it, didn't let it stop him. He simply saw it as a cost of doing business. So, before he became a comic tycoon, Goodman had a close call that, in a twist of fate worthy of the pulp magazines that he published, saved his life. In 1937, when returning from his European honeymoon with his wife, Jean Davis, they had tickets to return upon the luxurious Hindenburg airship. Unable to secure seats together, they took the alternative flight. Just days later, the Hindenburg burst into flames upon landing in New Jersey. So if they had secured those seats, there would be no Marvel Comics today. No Spider-Man, no Avengers, and no pop culture as we know it. It's an interesting timeline. I would very much like to see how things would have gone out. But hey, at least Goodman was alive, and we got to have what we have. Anyway, by 1938, Goodman was a wealthy man. He owned 27 successful pulp and sports magazines, bought his parents a nice house in Brooklyn, and stuffed his fledgling empire with loyal family members, a necessity in an era of the Great Depression and rampant anti-Semitism. In the late 1930s, a new medium exploded onto the scene: the comic book. When Superman debuted in 1938 and Batman the year later in 1939, they were immediate sensations. Martin Goodman, always with his ear on the ground, saw the trend. Within 3 months of Batman's debut, he was ready to jump in. He didn't start with an in-house team. True to form, he subcontracted a comic book packager named Funnies Inc. to provide the content for a test run. The name of that test run? Marvel Comics number 1, cover dated October 1939. The comic, published under his newly formed Timely Publications imprint, introduced two major new characters: Kyle Burgo's flaming android, the Human Torch, and Bill Everett's vengeful anti-hero, Namor the Submariner. It also featured two repurposed pulp heroes from Goodman's back catalog, the Tarzan knockoff Khazar and the Masked Rider. The imprint, in its initial run, sold 80,000 copies almost immediately. Goodman the Gambler doubled down, rushing out a second printing that sold an astonishing 800,000 copies. This had no longer become a fad, it was a phenomenon, and Goodman cut out the middleman, and thus Timely Comics was officially born. He set up a dedicated comics department in his offices in McGrew-Hill building off Times Square. His first hire was a writer named Joe Simon as editor. On Simon's recommendation, the second hire was an explosive, gruff young artist named Jack Kirby. They were two of the most gifted creators the industry would ever see. But the office staff remained very heavily family-based. So his wife Jean was a writer and an editor. His brothers Artie, Dave, and Abe held various roles, and perhaps most fatefully, Goodman hired his wife's 17-year-old cousin, one Stanley Lieber, as an office assistant. That young man, of course, would soon adopt the pen name Stanley. In 1941, Simon and Kirby hit lightning in a bottle. They proposed a patriotic superhero who was, crucially, needed before America entered World War II. Goodman immediately recognized the potential and gave the character Captain America his own title. The cover of Captain America number 1 was released in late 1940, and it showed the hero punching Adolf Hitler in the face, a sensational, brazen political statement in a time when roughly 95% of Americans opposed entering the war. Goodman, whose family had fed prosecution, printed it anyway. It was a massive financial and personal risk, and the German-American Bund sent death threats to the office. But the comic was an instant hit, selling about 1 million copies, so it worked out for Goodman in the end. But the early success of Timely was marred by the first of many disputes over money. Simons and Kirby discovered that Goodman was minimizing the reported profits of Captain America and thus reducing their contractual royalties. Disgruntled, they secretly took works from DC Comics. When Goodman found out, he was kind of indignant and fired them in late 1941. Timely was left with virtually no staff. Goodman's solution? He made the 19-year-old Stanley Lieber the temporal editor, a position that he would hold for the next 31 years. After the war, interest in superheroes kind of waned, and Martin Goodman, ever the astute trend chaser, responded by shifting gears completely. Timely was informally known as Atlas Comics after the new newsstand distribution company he founded in 1951 began pumping out an immense amount of comics across every genre imaginable. Like they had everything: westerns, jungle adventures, horror, romance, science fiction, and teen humor. This was a magazine management corporation and an umbrella company Goodman had formed. Now, the real moneymakers were men's adventure magazines like Stag, Male, and For Men Only, which were immensely popular. This division also published the notorious digest-sized girly cartoon magazines under the Humorama imprint, featuring pinup art by greats like Bill Ward and Dan DeCarlo, alongside photos of icons like Betty Page. The contrast between these publications and the teen romance comics coming out of the same office, often written and drawn by the same freelancers, was stark, but it was all part of Goodman's hustle. Goodman, for his cost-cutting, had a genuine eye for literary talent. Sorry, slip of the tongue. Literary talent. He provided early breaks for writers like Bruce J. Friedman, Mikey Spillane, and Patricia Highsmith. Most famously, in 1959, he hired a young postal worker named Mario Puzo to write for his crime pulps. A decade later, Puzo serialized his new novel in Goodman's Mail magazine. The novel, The Godfather. In 1951, Goodman, seeking more control, took another huge gamble. He founded his own distribution company, which, as I mentioned before, was Atlas, named after the Greek titan bearing the world on his shoulders. This let him cut out the middleman, controlling the shelf space, and he quickly flooded the newsstands with hundreds of magazines and comic titles. He understood the value of monopolizing real estate on the newsstand before anyone else did. But the 1950s brought crisis. Anti-comics hysteria swept the nation, led by the anti-comics crusader himself, Frederick Wetterham. I think this is the Seduction of the Innocent guy. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's him. The guy who thinks Batman is like plowing Robin. Anyway, the rise of television also threatened the entire publishing industry. Goodman sold his distribution arm in 1956 and signed with the American News Company, the ANC. The following year, the ANC suddenly shut down, leaving Goodman stranded. He was forced to sign with only one major distributor, Independent News. The problem? Independent News was owned by Harry Donfield and Jack Leibowitz, the owners of DC Comics, his bitter rivals. Seizing the opportunity to rein in their oppressive competitor, DC's owners limited Goodman to distributing only 8 comic titles per month. Goodman went from publishing 80 comics a month to just 8. The crisis was total. By 1959, Goodman had Stan Lee fire the entire comic staff, leaving Lee as a human pilot light in a tiny cubicle. Every family member, including his brothers and his cousins, lost their jobs. It was a dark time, but as his niece Maria Winkelson recalled, he had to do what he had to do. Yet these desperate conditions create an opportunity for a miracle. With almost no budget, Lee was forced to write everything himself, working closely with a handful of freelancers he could afford. A talented but green newbie named Steve Ditko, and, swallowing his pride, the king himself, Jack Kirby, who returned to work for the publisher he resented because he needed a steady income. Which, of everything I've said, is one of the biggest things that I can relate to. These small, brilliant group, forced to collaborate intimately, was unironically positioned to create the most cohesive and revolutionary comic universe in history. The official story of the Marvel Age, as Stan Lee told it, begins on a golf course. His rival, Jack Leibowitz, bragged about the success of DC's Justice League of America, prompting Goodman to rush back to the office and order Lee to create a superhero team. The ensuing result was the Fantastic Four in November 1961. However, Leibowitz later claimed that he never had a golf game with Goodman or discussed sales. The apocryphal tale simply reinforced the idea of Goodman as a reactive, copycat publisher. The reality is that Goodman, ever the trend chaser, simply caught wind of DC's success and tasked Lee with replicating it, as he had always done. But what Goodman didn't know was that Lee was bored with the juvenile comics they were producing those days, and was a few days away from quitting. It was Lee's wife, Joanne, who suggested he write the comics the way he always wanted to, since he had nothing left to lose. And Goodman, the publisher who only cared about what was sold, gave Lee the creative latitude to try the unconventional. He signed off on the Fantastic Four, a dysfunctional family, not a noble super team. He signed off on the Hulk, a scary monster. He signed off on Spider-Man, a mopey, prosecuted teen. Though apparently he initially resisted on Spider-Man. Can you imagine? If Spider-Man was never created, Marvel would be in a much, much worse place right now. The comic now officially began using the Marvel Comics logo in earnest, introducing a host of legendary characters. The Hulk, Thor, and Ant-Man in 1962, Iron Man, the Avengers, and the X-Men in 1963, Spider-Man and Doctor Strange created with Steve Ditko. The new Marvel introduced heroes with feet of clay, characters who bickered, worried about money, and had real-world problems. Equally revolutionary was Goodman's implicit acceptance of a shared universe. What happened in the pages of Fantastic Four had repercussions in The Amazing Spider-Man. In the DC model, crossovers were special. In the Marvel model, they were the fabric of reality. Martin Goodman was deeply involved with the business side. He dictated page counts and character pairings to save costs. He also had a keen understanding of marketing. As comic creator J.L. Mass noted, most decisions ran through him. He knew all of the Marvel heroes, their specifications, and how to market them. Vince Fago, a former editor, confirmed this by saying he never interfered with what Stan was doing. He had faith in Stan. The result was astonishing. In 1963, Marvel reportedly sold 22.5 million comics. By 1965, restricted by DC's distributor, they were selling 45.5 million, an explosive success. However, the true financial engine of magazines management was still the main magazines, not the comics, which accounted for most of a third of the revenue. The money, the real money, was coming from licensing. In the mid-1960s, Goodman sold the rights to the first Marvel cartoons, the Marvel superheroes in 1966 and Spider-Man in 1967 for a massive sum. So, just as in his pulp days, the cartoon studios reused the stories and the art straight from the comics. Goodman made millions, but he owned nothing legally. He owed nothing legally to the creators. So Kirby and Ditko, because they were paid on a work-for-hire basis, got nothing. Ethically, they were furious. They saw no cut. Goodman had promised Kirby a share of the earnings from his creations, but he kept stalling. The creators felt exploited, and the creative team began to fracture. Ditko and Kirby famously quit shortly thereafter, frustrated by Goodman's stinginess and the lack of credit given to them versus the public face of the company, Stan Lee. In early 1968, Goodman was ready to cash out. He was contacted by Martin Ackerman, the owner of Perfect Film and Chemical Corporation, a glowing conglomerate. Ackerman made Goodman a princely offer for his publishing business, grouped under Magazine Management Co. As the sole owner, Goodman pocketed a reported $9 million, a staggering amount in 1968, the equivalent of roughly $83 million today. The deal included all 84 of his imprints and subsidiaries, including Marvel itself. Jack Kirby was enraged that he didn't see a single cent from this sale, and he reportedly claimed Goodman sold Marvel for less worth than Ant-Man alone. Yet, for Goodman, someone who had grown up in poverty, in the Great Depression, who had come from nothing, that $9 million? Well, I don't think he cared much. As part of the deal, Goodman stayed on as publisher until 1972. In 1969, Perfect Film acquired a new distribution company, finally freeing Marvel from the constraints imposed on it by DC's distributor. Goodman told Lee to publish as many comics as he liked. This decision launched Marvel into its major 1970s expansion, where it eventually surpassed DC as the industry leader. Goodman continued his management style, giving Lee crucial editorial approval, such as publishing Amazing Spider-Man number 96 to 98 in 1971 to promote an anti-drug message without the Comics Code's authority seal of approval, a bold, risk-taking move that shook the industry. The end of his tenure, however, was marked by a bitter familial conflict. Goodman had been grooming his son, Chip Goodman, to succeed him as publisher in 1972. But Stan Lee, after 31 years as editor-in-chief, felt underappreciated and, having received no cut of the company's sale, demanded the promotion. According to some accounts, Lee was ready to quit and had even negotiated a deal with DC Comics. Afraid of losing the public face of Marvel, the new corporate owners, Perfect Film, bypassed Chip and installed Stan Lee as the new publisher and president. The relationship between Martin Goodman and Stan Lee, once employer and favored nephew-in-law, was permanently damaged. As Mira Wilkinson described, the office atmosphere at the time was they got along occasionally. Other times they fought in the office, and everyone kind of ran and hid under their desks. The final insult to Goodman came in 1973, when Lee stepped down from the president's role that he disliked. The Goodmans expected Chip to take over. Instead, Perfect Film gave the job to a third party, Al Landau. When Chip confronted him, Landau's response was brutal. He apparently told Chip, "Do you want to be fired or do you want to quit?" Hurt and betrayed and robbed of his legacy, Goodman was consumed by a desire for revenge. As Marvel executive Tom Brevoort put it, he wanted to take Marvel down and show that it was really his business acumen that had been responsible for the success of Marvel. In June 1974, Martin and Chip Goodman launched Seaboard's Publishing and resurrected the name Atlas Comics. Their comics were set up literally across the corner from Marvel. The industry quickly nicknamed the new venture Vengeance Inc. They came out swinging, launching 23 comic book series and boldly declaring themselves the new House of Ideas. But true to Martin's nature, the characters were derivative knockoffs of Marvel's greatest hits. The Tiger Man was just Spider-Man, the Brute was just the Hulk, and Wolf the Barbarian was just Conan's challenged cousin. However, Vengeance Inc. was a massive market disruptor. Goodman poured money into it, offering freelancers higher rates than Marvel or DC, and in some cases 50% more. Crucially, he offered creator ownership stakes in new characters and promised to return original artwork to artists, a revolutionary concept at the time. He poached top-rate talent, including the famously disgruntled Steve Ditko and industry heavyweights like Wally Wood and Neil Adams. Stan Lee, recognizing the threat, wrote a panic letter to Marvel's freelancers comparing Goodman to Hitler? Like, he didn't name him in that letter, but Jesus Lee. Why would you The man's family escaped prosecution from people who hated Jews. Why would you compare him to Hitler? I like Stan Lee, but sometimes Stan Lee could be an asshole. Rightfully, after this, Lee and Goodman never spoke to each other again. Unfortunately, despite the all-star talent, Atlas or Seaboard Comics could not prove to be less than the sum of its parts. Some books were good, but much of the output was rushed and lacked cohesion. The company suffered from distribution issues, and many speculated that DC and Marvel closed ranks to crowd Atlas out of the newsstands by increasing their own title counts. The failed comeback cost Goodman a fortune. In late 1975, just over a year and 65 issues later, Atlas closed its doors. While the venture failed financially, it succeeded in revolutionizing the industry one last time. Goodman's high creator rates and revolutionary practices forced other publishers, including Marvel and DC, to eventually adopt similar policies like returning original artwork and offering better deals to creators. Goodman's long and turbulent career ended on a financial loss, but a lasting structural victory for creators. Weeks after the shutdown of Atlas, Goodman retired to Palm Beach, Florida. He spent his last years playing golf and enjoying Scrabble, a game he excelled at. His grandson recalled that, having dropped out of school, his grandfather took immense pride in being a man of letters and a successful publisher. Goodman died on June 6, 1992, at the age of 84, having suffered from Alzheimer's disease. Since the 1980s, it was a hard fate for a man who Stan Lee once described as sharp as a tack. So, how did Marvel, the juggernaut, honor its founder? With a single paragraph notice in Marvel Age magazine. In the decades that followed, the narrative of Marvel became centered almost entirely upon the creative brilliance of Stan Lee. Martin Goodman, the man who founded Timely, nurtured Atlas, and ultimately signed the checks that kept the company alive through its toughest years, was largely erased. His grandson, Jason Goodman, sums up the tragic irony by saying, "When I tell people that my grandfather founded Marvel Comics, they say, Stan Lee is your grandfather?" Martin Goodman was a complex man. He was a ruthless opportunist, a schlock master who pinched pennies, stiffed artists, and used his business to dodge creditors. But he was also a visionary entrepreneur, a loving family man, and a gambler who knew when to take a risk and when to let creative chaos flourish. He was the man who spotted the trend and made the hires, greenlit the projects, and critically made the business decisions that allowed the Marvel Age to be born under impossible odds.